By diagnostic definition, autistic individuals face an impairment in social communication. Now, this impairment can look differently across the entire autism spectrum across a wide variety of individuals. But for some, that means that engaging in everyday conversation can be an absolute nightmare. So for us as communication professionals, it is our job to help ease that anxiety and document growth in reciprocal communication. Presently, there is no scale to truly document reciprocal communication, so my study seeks to do exactly that by providing a novel way to evaluate the quality of conversational responses in improv theater. I'm Mariesa LaRosa, and I am an undergraduate at Butler University, and this presentation serves as the culmination of my honors thesis. So to begin my study, I had 6 adolescents that were all on the autism spectrum or had a similar diagnosis that were verbal and could engage in conversation. And all 6 of them participated in a program titled Camp Yes and they had never participated in this program before. And Camp Yes and is a 5-day virtual improv theater program based out of Indiana University, where it helps these adolescents learn and perform improv games, while also teaching them this idea of yes and. And yes and is a concept that's used in improv, but can also be used in everyday conversation, where on stage, someone might present an offer, i.e. any piece of information, whether that's verbal or nonverbal, and that person must accept the truth of that offer. And then once they accept the truth of that offer, then they must advance the offer and contribute to it with something new and additional. And the cycle will start all over again in that dialogue conversation. So that's really the basis of what my study will be around, is that idea of yes and. So to assess reciprocal communication, I sent out 2 assessments. The first was the social responsiveness scale, which was administered across 3 data collection periods prior to participation in camp, immediately after participation in camp, and 60 days following. And this evaluation really sought to measure the autistic severity of social communication across a couple different categories in the realm of autism. And what I found after administering that was that there was not any significant improvement across the 6 participants or across the 3 data collection periods for any of the participants after participation in the program. So then I decided I also need to evaluate reciprocal communication in and of itself. But presently there lacks an evaluative measure to do so in an objective way. So I created my own novel evaluation scale to measure the quality and frequency of conversational responses. And because my program, the Camp Yes and, was a virtual program, I was able to record with video documentation some of the Zoom games that these participants engaged in. So I had about 1 to 4 games for each participant every day. And what I did was I went back through those interactions and I was able to categorize their interactions that fell under a 4-point scale to evaluate the quality of their reciprocal communication. Specifically, that first level I categorized it as an inappropriate response, which would earn the participant a score of 0. And this would be someone who lacks a response to the stimulus on stage or continues to go off his own idea without acknowledging anyone else's ideas on the stage, or would offer something irrelevant to the scene at hand. Then that next level would be that idea of acknowledgement. And this would be someone who is able to recognize the truth of someone else's offer. So for example, someone might say, "Oh, it's a lovely day to be at the amusement park." And then the subject will reply, "Yes, it is." And while that response is an appropriate response to that offer, it doesn't offer anything contributive to that conversation. And it doesn't allow that conversation to keep flowing because it offers no additional information. The next type of level that I categorized was advancement with prompting. So this is a participant who can offer a new and generative idea, but in order to do that, they need to be prompted specifically by the facilitator. So the facilitator might nudge the participant to say, "Hey, Billy, what would your character do in this situation?" And that kind of gives them an extra verbal cue to participate. And finally, that ideal answer would be an independent advancement, which would merit the participant 2 points for this response. So this would be someone going off the previous example. "It's a lovely day to be at the amusement park," and the subject replies, "Yes, and I'm so glad we came when the lines are short." So with this new type of response, this allows more conversation to flow because now we have that new piece of information that it's not crowded today at the amusement park. are. That's why. And that can give that conversational partner more to build off of as they continue to build that scene together. So what I did after I categorized each of their responses, I totaled up the number of points they received per day and divided that by the number of total opportunities or number of total points they could have earned for the day to give them a final score as a percent. So here are the results of each of my 6 participants, and as you can tell, there are pretty varying trends across all 6 of the participants. But even though there are varying trends, I think it's very beneficial now that there is at least some sort of quantitative measure to say how well they were engaging in that reciprocal communication every single day. But I think what might actually be more beneficial than looking at the score values themselves is to look more so at the types of responses each participant provided. So these graphs show the different types as percents. And for example, in participant number 1, the yellow box indicates an advancement with prompting. So as you can tell, that those first few days, that participant was heavily relying on prompting. But as the week progressed, the participant actually got a little bit better at offering independent offers. So even though there are no really unifying trends across each of these 6 participants, I think it's really interesting to analyze each participant individually to see what types of strengths they offered and what types of responses they tended to gravitate towards. So I would say there is inconclusive evidence to support any improvement in reciprocal communication after participation in the improv theater program, but though there's not really conclusive evidence to support improvement, there's a lot to be learned, especially since this was more of a pilot study for this scale itself to evaluate reciprocal communication in real-time conversation. So, for example, one of the limitations of the scale itself was the fact that I measured both verbal and nonverbal responses, but I found that the nonverbal responses sort of became an all or nothing type of scoring opportunity, where either the participant did it or they didn't, but they weren't able to gain any of the middle scores for this type of response. So moving forward, I would only evaluate verbal responses with the present scale. I also found it pretty difficult to assess situations or scenes with more than 2 people in them because some participants were really engaged in the scene or would actually dominate that conversation. And by definition, they were earning total scores for that scene, but they were not appropriately listening to their other scene partners and letting them have a turn. On the flip side, we also had some more reserved participants that wouldn't be as willing to offer things in a larger group setting. So it was hard. I couldn't necessarily fault them for that lack of participation because it wasn't appropriate for them to engage in that behavior. So moving forward, I would only use this scale for dialogues between 2 different people. And I would possibly expand the scale to include that domination of conversation or that reservation to participate. Within the study itself, I had a few limitations, especially my small sample size, not only of 6 participants, but also of the number of opportunities each participant was allowed to engage in. I also recorded different games every day, which offered obviously not the most consistent results, but based on the present camp, that's kind of what we had to work with. And some games were more suitable to the scale, while some were more suitable to a particular student's strength. So moving forward, I would definitely have that consistency across each of the games that were documented. And then finally, there were different communication partners in each data sample. So I think that could also skew data because for some participants that are paired with a highly verbal or a person who's strong with reciprocal communication, they're probably going to support them better in that conversation than someone who is not as skilled in the area. And that can in turn reflect their score and offer lower scores for them. So I'd have the same communication partner across each of the data sample sections. For future use, I think this scale with a few modifications could be great to evaluate reciprocal communication in everyday conversation outside of the realm of improv. And when that scale becomes a little bit stronger, I think expanding it to other populations besides autism could also be very beneficial to evaluate reciprocal communication for those with aphasia or those with right hemisphere disorder. And then expanding it even further, I think it's really important that we use it to evaluate neurotypicals as well to see how well am I as a neurotypical person engaging in conversation? How well am I supporting others in my conversation as well? Am I setting up my scene partner, my conversational partner for success with my current way I advance that conversation? So looking inwardly at ourselves to evaluate that can really make this be a great tool, 1 for documentation, as well as 2 as a tool to help help us get better at supporting others in communication. So in conclusion, I would say there was inconclusive evidence to support any improvement in reciprocal communication, but the study does provide an objective measure to evaluate reciprocal communication as well as a potential tool to support communication moving forward, which might make engaging in everyday dialogue a little bit less scary for those we tend to support. Thank you so much.